I want to thank not only the folks who organized this tonight, which is the Ashland Advocates for a Clean Environment, and in particular, the Citizens Advisory Committee that was specifically established for the cleanup of Nyanza, but also to express my thanks to EPA and Bruce Marshall from the EPA and Pat Dunnick from the DEQE for all that they've done. The flyer that you have that was handed out was designed specifically for this night by the EPA to give you some background information about the site. The hope is that by the end of the evening, all of us will have a much better, clearer sense of where we are in the process and where we're going to be going. Before I go too much further, I'd like to introduce some people tonight who are here as your advocates and as sources of information. And I'd like them to just identify themselves as I mention their name. Tom Wallstein, just if you could raise your hand. Tom is up back there. Tom is the head of the Ashland Landfill Advisory Board, I hope soon to be out of work in that context. Bev Dort, president of the AACE. Arthur Shapiro from the AACC, that by the way is the Ashland Advocates for a Clean Environment. Kathy Anderson, who's a representative from Senator Kennedy's office. Kathy, would you raise your hand again, Kathy? They want to know where Senator Kennedy is. Is Karen Stromberg here from DEQE, Community Relations? Karen. Paul Knittel, EPA Community Relations Director. Thank you, Paul. Frank Lilly, EPA Vault Manager.
There'll be no hands.
Frank's not here.
Okay. Richard Brown, who is the current chair of the CAC, Community Advisory Committee. Arnold Baker. Excuse me just one second, Arnold. Dr. Henry Faster, Chairman of the Board of Public Works. Claudia Lefter, Water and Sewer Commission. And before I go any further, the reason I held is someone here from Congressman Early's office also. And what is your name, please?
Sarah Byrne.
Sarah? Sure. Sarah Byrne from Congressman Early's office. Thank you all for coming. We have a little surprise tonight. Our chairman of our Board of Selectmen, Arnold Baker, has something he'd like to say to us. Arnold?
I don't think the fact that I'm going to say something is a surprise, but the event, I hope, will be a surprise, but I don't think it's going to be because I read about it myself in the paper tonight. We can't seem to keep anything secrets around here. I did want to say prior to making the presentation that I want to thank everybody that participated in the Nyanza effort on behalf of the Board of Selectmen. I'd also like to recognize two of my colleagues over here tonight, Fred Winsman and Ricky Galani. A couple of fine, outstanding gentlemen. Town of Ashland of 11,000 plus has had monumental problems in 87, 86. Hopefully they'll be ceased and desisted in 1988. And the problem is that when you have so many problems, and we have one direction to head in, and we try to keep track of many, many things, you have to go to key people to get information. Obviously, we can't deal with the federal, we can't deal with the state, we have enough trouble dealing with the town. That's not being disrespectful, but it's a matter of fact. And I've been very successful in achieving factual data, and I'd like to recognize three people tonight that, as far as I'm concerned, have been top shelf. And everybody that served on the committee, everybody sitting on these panels is super duper. However, there's three that stand out in my mind, and my personal observations of them. And first one I'd like to commend is Pat Donahue of the DEQE. Pat has been very cooperative. She's been factual in the data she's given me. She has not misrepresented what she stands for and what the DEQ stands for and what the sludge meant to Ashland. And she's been up right front. I think back in last August she took a stand that it should not be here because she was afraid of runoff from Nyanza, and by golly, she's right, and she was right all along. So I have to give her a #1 bouquet as far as the state is concerned, and we've been leaning very heavily in the last few months on Congressman Early's office. And he's done a great job, and I want to commend and ask Sarah Byrne to stand up, please. Sarah, where are you? Okay, why don't you come up front with the camera? But anyway, Sarah's been very cooperative, and I thank her very much on behalf of myself, the Landfill Advisory Committee, Board of Selectmen, and the Town of Ashland, as well as Pat. Now, third but not least, even though we are supposed to know quite a bit, we don't know everything. And please, thank you. When you talk about local affairs, you talk about local environment, you talk about sludge, Nyanza, concern for protecting the environment. I met a young lady several months ago, and I worked with a very, very fine group, the Landfill Committee, and they did a great job. There's some very fine people on there. And, you know, you could give everybody a bouquet that participated, but there's one young lady from her heart, and you know, you talk about a town of 11,000 people that has problems, but the thing that gets things done is for people to participate, for people to be dedicated, for people to be sincere, and have beliefs in what they believe in. And she did this as well as members of all the committees that I served on in the sludge. And the Nyanza group has been more or less self-supporting, and I'd be the first to admit, although I was subjected to it many years ago when I lived in Cherry Street, and all we concerned then was air pollution. But the selectmen, we tried to do it in a non-offensive manner the other night. We wrote a proclamation. And probably you say, well, what's a proclamation? It can be issued by anybody to anybody, but and I know this is not the meat of the meeting, but it's what led to this meeting, believe it or not. I just want to read it, if I may have your time for a couple of minutes. And it's a proclamation. It just says, whereas the town of Ashland recognizes the great service rendered by Beverly Dort in the areas of protecting the health of the town's residents and the environment of the land and water within Ashland. Whereas Beverly Dort, over the recent years, has dedicated her cause, given unselfishly of her time, and shared her knowledge for the betterment of quality of life. Big words. Whereas Beverly Dort has actively served in a leadership role in many capacities. The town's first Hazardous Waste Day Committee, startup of a recycling committee and program, Nyanza Night 2 coordinator, AACE chairperson, coordinator of EPA Nyanza, information releases to the citizens, and she's done a fine job in that. Member of MWRA Citizen Advisory Landfill Committee, member of Nyanza CAC, performing chemical research for concerned citizens, the town's Emergency Planning Committee, with Representative Barbara Gardner, spearheaded the Toxic Use Source Reduction Bill. Whereas Beverly Dort received the Massachusetts Campaign Award for her environmental efforts, be it resolved that on this, the 23rd day of March 1988, the Board of Selectmen, on behalf of the town of Ashland, officially congratulates Beverly Dort for the many valuable contributions and her commitment to preserving and improving human life. The citizens of the town of Ashland are forever grateful, and thank you, town of Ashland, Arnold R. Baker, Robert F. Rydell, Edward G. Bates, Carl R. Galani, and Fred M. Winsman. And Beverly, on behalf of the town and the Board of Selectmen and myself personally, did one fine job. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnold. Thank you, Arnold, and to the selectmen, and congratulations, Bev. You know, I keep thinking of Ashland as the only town I know that consistently turns lemons into lemonade, and I think that what's happened with regard to the Community Advisory Committee is one example that we've taken a tough situation and turned it into a source of community spirit and community action. After having spent 8 years working with 400 different community groups around the state, citizen participation is not an easy effort. And it does take the kind of initiative that one single citizen working with others can make a difference. And I want to add my congratulations to the Board of Selectmen. Before we go any further, I would like to invite Senator Burke to just say a word. I know you've got another commitment in Natick. Senator, this gentleman represents 6 communities, over 150,000 people. So I appreciate you being here tonight, Senator.
Thank you, David. We're really here to listen to the DEQE and EPA people, but I do want to take just a minute to say that as one who has been involved in the Nyanza detection and cleanup effort going back now to 1980, 1981, I have recollections of Board of Public Health meetings going back that far. I'm very gratified to see the substantial progress that has been made to date. I'm distressed, as I think many of us are, about the funding impasse with respect to the additional Superfund money to allow the transportation away by truck of some of the contaminated soil. And I hope that that funding problem can be resolved. I know Joe Early and Ted Kennedy's office couldn't have two more effective people working in that regard. And maybe Pat Donahue, Pat, if you could perhaps address yourself to what the state DEQE, or really what the legislature might be able to do if the federal funding continues to be an impasse, what the state legislature might do, for example, for accelerated payment towards the 10% state share and ongoing maintenance funding, for which the state government will have responsibility. I know that's one of the questions that I would like to leave with you before I depart, as I must, over to Natick in the next few minutes. But again, I hope that we can continue to make the progress and to have this kind of federal, state, local government partnership that we've had to date. And I must say I'm overwhelmed by all the bouquets which the chairman is throwing out here tonight. He indeed is mellowing and reaching new heights of eloquence, and I would like to, from what I know, share the sentiments of the Board of Selectmen with respect to the citizens mentioned who have been so energetic in all of these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Gardner, who is representing Ashland and Holliston, and 4 other towns. I don't know we don't know what we're representing these days, do we?
No. 8 other towns at last count. I'm happy to be here for Nyanza Night 2, I guess it is, or 3, I'm sorry. I was here at the last one, and I was so impressed with the number of people and the commitment of the citizens in this community, and that has shown itself over and over and over again through the fight, the vigorous fight and the sludge dump, and for your organization and your persistence and your willingness to work very effectively with federal and state officials, and this kind of publication that's sent out that's so useful and so complete in its information. Naturally, I would second what Senator Burke said in terms of the concern we have with federal cutbacks for the transportation of what they've discovered here and how we can effectively get it out and keep it out, and with the uncertainty that we don't know what we're going to discover down the road. And I also want to second the Board of Selectmen's commendation of Beverly Dort. She is one terrific, energetic lady. She is there for all kinds of environmental issues, be it Nyanza, toxic use reduction, recycling, and most recently household hazardous waste. Without people like her in communities, we just simply wouldn't function, and we need more like her. So I commend her publicly, and I'm sure each of you recognize what she's done for this community in particular. I want to put a plug in for another, because I too have to go. I have inherited in the redistricting the town of Southborough, and they're having a meeting concerning the 990 project, and I want to be sure that I go over there to Framingham tonight, so I won't be able to stay for all of this, and I would very much like to hear what is said, but I'll get some feedback from Representative Magnani. I'd like to put a plug in for the Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day that's being planned for the communities of Holliston, Ashland, and Hopkinton. And it will be May 14th. There are brochures out in the lobby that you can pick up. They're yellow. And I'd like each one of you to take one as you leave, if you haven't already, and sign up to help. It's a sort of labor-intensive project, and it requires a lot of help. And so it would be very useful if you could spare the time on a Saturday in May to help us out with this. We'd like as many people as possible to participate. So there is going to be an exhibit. It was originally scheduled to be on hand tonight, but it's going to be available on March 30th when we're having an education night to inform people about the household hazardous waste collection. I think that's really all. There's a sign-up sheet and the brochure is out there. So thank you, and I know this will be a very productive evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We're going to try to get to the informational part of this evening, which is the central part, as quickly as possible. Bev has given me a couple of quick housekeeping details. First of all, if you haven't signed in, we're asking that you sign in on the way as you come in, or perhaps intermission, because we're going to be using that as a list to send you further information. There are fact sheets in the hall, if you haven't picked them up, which give some detail as to the status of the cleanup at this point. We'd like you to pick them up because there's a glossary of terms that you can use as we go through the presentation. During the intermission, there will be a 3D model of the cap and a cross-section colored poster of the design. Most of you may have seen it. She also says here there's a no fishing sign out back. So for those of you who are planning on throwing your line in the lobby, it's prohibited. No fishing in the lobby tonight. There's also a Tyvek suit. I don't know what that's about, but I guess it's to keep you from being affected by the toxic waste at the site. Also, let me say that the Community Advisory Committee is not a highly closed group. As a matter of fact, they consistently try to get more people to their meetings. They meet every fourth Tuesday of the month, at 7 p.m. They would like more participation. They've had meetings consistently, except for the summer now, for over 2 years. And they're the ones that put this Nyanza Night on, and I'm sure they're going to be helpful in maintaining the role of liaison between the state, the federal government, local officials, and citizens. The process tonight will be fairly straightforward. The presentations will be made on the actual cleanup itself and what the current status is. We will then have a short break during which people can write down questions and answers that they might have, questions that they might have. And by the way, the reason for that is to make sure that everyone gets their questions answered. And then if for some reason the answers have not been sufficient, you're welcome to come to the microphone if you recognize your question and ask for a follow-up or a clarification. We intend to stay here as long as it takes to get your questions answered. Our hope is that we will take our break at about 9 or 9:15, break for about 15 minutes, and then come back with a question and answer period. With that, let me begin by introducing the EPA project manager for the Nyanza site, who will provide the site history and background as to how we got where we are right now. Let me also quickly thank the Mindes Middle School and Union Donuts for their contributions for the donuts tonight. I'd like to introduce Bruce Marshall from the EPA. Bruce, take it away. It's all yours.
Are we on here?
Yes.
Good evening, and thank you all very much for coming. My name is Bruce Marshall from United States Environmental Protection Agency. I'm the project manager for the Nyanza site. Would like to thank the sponsors for their hard work in pulling us all together here tonight and providing the agency with the opportunity to communicate with the community on the important matters here related to the Nyanza site. I'd like to start with a brief history of the site and the EPA involvement in the site, which I think will put a little perspective on the rest of the presentations that we'll have here tonight. So the Nyanza site is approximately a 35-acre site, including developed areas where there are presently operating facilities and businesses, and other undeveloped wooded areas included on the site. From 1917 to about 1977, numerous companies had operated on the properties that we now refer to as the Nyanza site, primarily in the textile dye manufacturing business. And those processes, conducted over those many years, are responsible for the generation of the wastes, heavy metals, and organic solvent-type chemicals that are the problems associated with the site that we know of today. Well, the site was actually discovered in the early 1970s, primarily as a result of the discovery of mercury in fish in the Sudbury River. And the agency, the EPA, had traced that mercury contamination back upstream through the Sudbury River to a source identified as the Nyanza site here in Ashland. Following that, the state involvement along with the EPA and a review of all the information that was available at that time, it was apparent to the state that the site certainly was of concern, and they recommended to the EPA that the site be included on what had recently become the National Priority List, which is the list of hazardous waste sites to be addressed under the Superfund legislation. So the site was included on the National Priority List in 1982 and became eligible for Superfund monies, and then we started in the process of the Superfund process of doing the remedial investigation, the feasibility study, leading toward decisions as to what the cleanup method for the site problems would be. The first phase, phase one, which is really what we're here to talk about primarily tonight, was an investigation of the site proper with the soils and the sediments in the wetlands that were right on the site. The second phase of the study is a study to focus on the groundwater. Groundwater conditions are a little bit different on the site in that the sediment and the soil problems relate more to metals, where the groundwater problems relate to soluble organic type compounds, industrial solvents. And the third phase of the study would be a study of the Sudbury River, its water, its sediment, its environment in total. Each phase will consist of a Superfund process, a remedial investigation, which is simply a data gathering phase, a feasibility study, which is a study that develops the alternatives from which a decision on the cleanup evaluates those alternatives and one is selected. And finally, a record of decision, which is an agency document which set forth what the cleanup option will be from the range of those prepared. In addition to the three phases, one other step has been included in the process here at the Nyanza site, and that is that during the first phase investigation, it became known that an area of the site which we've come to call the vault area required some immediate attention because of the risks associated with the high concentration of contaminants in that particular area. But the vault project itself, I'll talk about that in more detail when I get through the phases 1, 2, and 3. So we'll come back to that. The phase 1 remedial investigation and feasibility study was conducted in the period of 1983 to 1985 and led to a decision in September of '85, which had selected the remedial action based on the data developed in the earlier studies. That particular cleanup is what we're here to talk about tonight, and involves primarily the site sediment, site soils. The phase 2 study, the remedial investigation and feasibility study, to focus on the groundwater, both on the site and off the site in the area between the site proper and the Sudbury River. That is underway right now. During the groundwater study, we'll be looking at several important things. We'll be looking at the contaminant levels for solvent-type chemicals. Those are like chlorinated benzene compounds, trichloroethylene, nitrobenzene, which are the things were the subject of concern in the vault area. We'll be looking at the impact of contamination in the groundwater in the residential area, including concerns for wet basements. We'll be looking at the potential impact from any contaminated groundwater on the town water supply pipelines that run along Pleasant Street or within the industrial area or other streets of which there may be any impact. We'll be looking at the full range of public health, environmental risks associated with any conditions that we find during the conduct of that particular study. And also we'll be modeling some of the groundwater conditions to determine its relationship with surface water and in particular the Sudbury River itself. As I said, the Phase 2 study has already started. We were out drilling in February, and we have already drilled quite a few monitoring well holes to evaluate groundwater conditions. We'll be proceeding on a staged process where the information we collect from those first monitoring wells and an investigation of the soil during that drilling process to guide us in where do we go next. Do we find any surprises in the early wells that we've drilled, which would lead us to believe we need to do more work in a particular area. So we will work on a staged process, and exactly when we'll finish, I don't know for certain, but it looks as if we would expect to wrap up the field work this summer. On the Phase 3 study, which is the study of the Sudbury River itself, that is something that's in its earlier stages. We have plans, kind of conceptual at this point, of how we intend to proceed and what areas we intend to focus on. But we do know that the initial work, the way I see it right now, we'll be looking at more of an intense study in the area of the Sudbury River from right across from the site down through the Saxonville Dam, which will include the reservoir areas along the course of the river. And to some extent, work will continue downstream in the Sudbury River beyond that point, primarily in sensitive areas where there is frequent public access. The initial work will include surface water sampling, sediment sampling, fish sampling, water flow measurements, sediment transport. That is basically how are the sediments moving in the river system. Are they going over the dams, or are they being trapped at each dam and only small amounts passing by? We'll also look at the public health and environmental concerns related to that study, both from sediment and water. Groundwater information that we've developed in the Phase 2 study will be plugged into that third phase study of the river, because then we'll have a better idea of the interrelationship between groundwater and the river. Is the river accepting groundwater as it discharges, or is the water in the river related to inputs from other areas and just flowing by? Now, as I had said, I would like to get back and discuss a little bit about the vault project, and that the vault project is a little bit different than the Phase 1, 2, 3 program that I've discussed. The vault removal project, which is a little bit different operation for the agency, was conducted by our environmental response people, and that was done to remove, as I said, the contaminated soil around the vault and the vault contents proper. The vault is kind of like a swimming pool that's buried underground. It had cement bottom, cement sides, but only a wooden cover, and a thin soil cover over that. And it contained high levels of solvent-type chemicals, nitrobenzene, chlorinated benzene compounds, trichloroethylene, but also heavy metals, arsenic, lead, chromium, which were the subject of the soil problems on site. But because of the risk posed by the highly contaminated waste in the vault area, it was decided that immediate action should be taken to address and remove that source area which was causing groundwater contamination. So EPA staff experienced in immediate response action started a project in September, where we excavated soils from around the vault area and incinerated those soils at an on-site mobile incinerator. That was completed in December of '87, and then in March of '88, this month, we're back to do the removal of the actual contents of the vault proper. Because of the nature of the sludge in the vault, and the fact that the solvents had leached out of the vault because the concrete or the cement walls of the vault were not intact, the solvents leached out and contaminated the soil outside of the vault and the groundwater around it. But there was more of a concentration of metals in the sludge than was originally thought. but it became apparent that those sludge materials could not be incinerated. So they were excavated out and solidified, which is mixed, use that term, we mixed it up with a stone dust to make sure that it trapped all that moisture in that was in the sludge, because it was below groundwater table. And then it made it in a state where it could be transported. And it was transported off-site to a waste disposal facility in Indiana. But because of some of the budgetary problems we had in the removals program, which is a different funding mechanism than what we're doing here under the remedial program, we ran out of money before we ran out of waste. So that we do have today a little bit of waste, approximately 500 tons, a mixture of about 250 tons of stone dust and about 250 tons of waste from the vault that is now stored temporarily on site. The waste is wrapped in a protective plastic cover with a liner under it to prevent anybody from coming in contact with it, or to prevent it from being eroded should we have rainstorms or anything like that. Now, this is considered only as a temporary measure, and we are investigating various options to see how we can best address the situation and get rid of that waste to a proper disposal area in as short a period of time as we can. We're looking at getting more money under the removal program so that the Environmental Services Division of EPA can continue their work. We're looked at options for this to be brought in under the Phase 1 remedial project, which is not the easiest or the fastest way to do it. And we also have had discussions with the state as what options they may see as reasonable to deal with this should we not be able to come up with additional funding in the short term to address it as it had been addressed during its earlier period. Now, if I may back up a little, I wanted to talk a little bit more in detail about what is the Phase 1 remedial design and the remedial action, which is the main topic for tonight's meeting. As I had said earlier, the record of decision, which outlined that remedial action or the cleanup option, was signed in '85, and that we now have a completed remedial design for that project, and we have concluded the bidding process for construction contracts on that. But the process of getting to that decision is one in which the agency evaluates a range of alternatives or cleanup options that are prepared and presented in a feasibility study. For the particular conditions on this site, we evaluated numerous options that included excavation of wastes completely, or selective excavation of waste in some areas but not in others, excavation to various depths within certain areas, and also on-site disposal options, off-site disposal options, all of which were coupled with groundwater and surface water diversion or isolation techniques to keep the waste that would be placed on site out of the environment and away from a circumstance which will allow it to migrate or move off-site. But the evaluation of all these cleanup options is basically focused on the ability of each of those options to address the problems that we had seen at the site, and those problems were primarily identified as direct contact threats from people touching contaminated soil, or worse, people ingesting contaminated soil. It doesn't seem like a thing that people would normally do, but with some of these contaminants and the concentrations that you see, the concern ranges right down to the amounts that people would have under fingernails from just normal activities, so that we were concerned about that as well. Well, the cleanup option that was selected is an option that calls for the excavation of wastes from 11 areas on the site and the transport of those wastes to the hill area, the area of the site that's called the hill, and consolidation with wastes that currently exist on the hill, and to isolate those wastes in a landfill and cover them over with an impermeable, watertight cap that will be constructed over the waste once they're placed in the landfill. On a part of the site that's the area from which groundwater would flow onto the site, there's included in the design for a trench to be excavated down into the bedrock or the ledge that will capture groundwater that may flow in the direction of that landfill and divert it around the landfill so that the groundwater does not come in contact with wastes that are contained in the landfill. And following the actual construction, there will also be established a monitoring well system so that in the longer term we can monitor the groundwater, and we'll also monitor the surface water to ensure that the effectiveness of that design is as we hope it will be, and that it's performing what it's intended to do. The actual construction project, funded with both federal and state dollars, and involving the on-site construction management participation by the Army Corps of Engineers. Today we had what's called the bid opening. The construction bid advertisement period ended. All the companies seeking to bid on the project had their bids in today, and we'll have a little bit of discussion on that from our representative from the Army Corps of Engineers, who was present at that opening today. But I think what we'll see when we go through a process that has to be accomplished relative to the construction contract, that we will wind up in a situation where we would expect construction work to start in the summer of this year. Later in tonight's presentation, Arthur Quaglieri from our EPA's contractor, Camp Tressa McKee, will present in more detail what the design of the Phase 1 cleanup is, and we'll have some slides, and we can show you, as well as information that's available in the lobby, figures and models and graphics, so that we'll have a clear understanding, I hope, when we complete our presentations tonight, of what exactly is going to happen out here. I thank you very much for your attention, and I'll return the floor to Representative Magnani.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Bruce, even though we have an awful lot of agencies involved, Bruce is the key person as the site manager for the EPA. And so if there are any questions about the process, Bruce is the person primarily to get in touch with. Before I introduce our next person, let me also say that there are an awful lot of agencies that have to pass on this design. One is the EPA, another one is the DEQE, another one is the Army Corps of Engineers. Then we have the local advisory committee and local officials. In addition, folks asked me if I might be able to get someone from the University of Massachusetts to review the plan and the hydrology of the site, sort of as a fourth or fifth or sixth independent party to look at the data. We have had two hydrologist professors from the University of Massachusetts who've agreed to review the plans. They are going to walk the site on Friday. They're looking at the hydrological data. So they're there to provide just one more sort of external source of information and judgment about the integrity of the design and the viability of the design for the hydrology of the site. So there certainly has been a lot of triangulation to make sure that this isn't any one person's single person's idea. To go on, the next person to speak is Pat Donahue, who is the site manager representing DEQE, and she will talk about DEQE's role and responsibilities regarding the cleanup. Pat.
Thank you. Is this on? Is this on? I don't think it's on. Okay. Thank you, Representative. As Representative Magnani already noted, there's been several agencies, federal and state, involved in the Nyanza project, and also several agencies just within the state itself. Since the 1960s, there's been various groups or state agencies involved in the site. In 1979, the Department of Environmental Quality Engineering established a new division to specifically handle hazardous waste issues. One task of the newly formed Division of Hazardous Waste was to evaluate known disposal sites across the state, one of which was Nyanza. As Bruce indicated, the DEQE initially ranked the site in 1981 and referred it to EPA for inclusion on their national priorities list. Once on the list, Nyanza became eligible for federal funding, and the EPA became the lead agency responsible for the investigation and ultimate cleanup of the site. The DEQE works in close contact with the EPA and its contractors. We've been involved in the Phase 1 design process from the beginning, as well as the development of work plans for the later phases of investigation. We're committed, as well as EPA is, to ensuring that public health and environmental issues are properly addressed during all site activities. Technical and public relations staff are assigned to the site, and we regularly attend the Community Advisory Committee meetings held monthly. In addition to general technical oversight, the DEQE must also agree with the EPA at certain critical points during the entire Superfund process, such as the record of decision and the final design plans. The state also has the ability to conduct certain actions independently of EPA. These actions are commonly referred to as short-term measures or interim measures, since they are usually conducted before the final site cleanup. At Nyanza, some of these actions have included fencing portions of the site, installing a culvert in Chemical Brook, covering contaminated soils, fish and sediment sampling in the Sudbury River, posting warning signs in the Sudbury River from Ashland to Concord, exploration of the hill area for buried drums, and the initial investigation around the vault area. Senator Burke asked me to address what the state may be able to provide in the event that EPA is not able to fund the remaining cleanup of the vault area. And in that event, that I think EPA will be able to work it out amongst them for our final, or our ultimate site contributions. So, in one way or another, the remaining soil that's left there will be disposed of properly. Back to the actual Phase 1 cleanup a little bit. The state had 3 primary responsibilities during the Phase 1 design. The first one is we needed to enter into a contract with the EPA. Second is to arrange access to properties affected by the cleanup. And the third was an agreement to conduct the long-term care at the site. The contract was basically a formalized agreement between the EPA and DEQE, which outlined our respective roles and responsibilities. It was primarily a financial agreement which obligated the state to pay 10% of the total construction costs, and the remainder, 90%, would be paid for out of federal funds. The state funds would come out of a bond fund established under Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 21E. In the contract, the state also commits to conducting the long-term care at the site after the first year of monitoring. The state will pay for 100% of the long-term care at the site after the initial year. We also agreed to participate in the community relations plan developed by EPA, as well as agreeing to obtain access, rights of way, or whatever is necessary for the contractor to complete the construction work. I'll talk a little bit on the access agreements. Short-term arrangements were made with the 12 property owners, which are within the work areas needed to conduct the excavation and removal actions. Most of the properties are commercial and are located within the official site boundaries, but there are also 2 residential properties which are affected. One of the terms of the agreements will be to meet with the property owners or operators and to brief them prior to construction occurring, and we will go out and give them very detailed information as to what to expect during the whole procedure. Long-term land use restrictions will be placed within the fenced area of the cap once it's completed. The fenced area is shown in Exhibit 4 on the fact sheet. The long-term restrictions are needed to ensure that access and security is maintained at the site over the long term. Last item I'm going to talk about is the long-term care or operation and maintenance. The objective of the long-term care program is to ensure that the materials placed within the capped area remain secure and do not leach into the surrounding soils or groundwater, thereby guaranteeing the protection of public health and the environment. Some of the items included in this long-term care program will be a detailed inspection program of the cap, trench, and surrounding areas to check for signs of erosion, settling, burrowing animals, or vandalism. It will also include just general upkeep of the site, mowing of the grass, that sort of thing, and also quarterly monitoring of groundwater and surface water. There will be 7 sets of monitoring wells installed to monitor the groundwater around the site, and those will be shown on some later slides. We'll also be conducting air monitoring of the gas vents and the cap perimeter. The monitoring program will continue for as long as it's necessary to do so. And there will also be a periodic review of the monitoring data. All this data will be provided to EPA and the town, and right now there will be an evaluation of the site every 5 years. So that basically sums up the state's involvement, and I'll give it back to the moderator.
Okay. Thank you very much, Pat. Maurice Bodwin is here to talk to us about what an Army Corps of Engineers is and what their role is in cleaning up hazardous waste. Maurice?
Stand up.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
Gentlemen, ladies, our purpose regarding the Nyanza site is basically as a contract administration role. We're involved as a result of an agreement between the EPA and the Corps of Engineers for our construction expertise to monitor, administrate the contract, and to oversee and to enforce the requirements of the contract specifications, both with respect to technical, health, safety, and any special requirements developed during the processes which have gone on here in the past years. We will have full-time personnel on site, possibly up to 4 people, with a resident engineer, a construction inspector, and a clerk secretary. The primary purpose, again, is to oversee our contractors who are solicited for the work under a bid process. The bidding process, as Bruce mentioned before, entails plans and specs. The contractors take the plans and specs out. They bid the project based on a competitive bidding basis. We opened bids up today, and we were lucky. We received 13 formal bids from 13 contractors from all over the country. Some local in Massachusetts and others as far away as Texas. The bids that were the apparent low bidder was Waste Conversions Incorporated from Colmar, Pennsylvania, with his low bid of approximately $8.3 million. These bids range from 8.3, the low bidder, to a high bid of $14.5 million. At this particular time, the bids were taken back to our Omaha office, where they will be evaluated prior to award. The award process involves the evaluation of the contractor's capability to do the work, his bonding capability, his financial status, his expertise and qualifications with respect to can he do the job. We do a thorough review in order that we can maintain a progress schedule that's been designed in the plans and specs, and in order that we can clean the site up in accordance with our drawings and the design. Once the job is awarded, it'll be a little bit of time before we get started. Again, summer of '88 seems to be a prudent time when we will be starting work, with a completion expected in the winter of 1989-90. At this particular point, we suspect everything will go on schedule, and that's about all our role is in this particular time, and I turn it back to the moderator.
Sure, could you tell us what the Army Corps of Engineers is? There are folks that
The
don't
Army
know.
Corps of Engineers is a civilian organization headed through our Washington office, which they call OCE, Office of the Chief of Engineers. The bulk of the people that work for the Army Corps of Engineers are civilians. We have a colonel and a lieutenant colonel as a division engineer, and also as a contracting officer. As a contracting officer, it's his responsibility to sign any manifest required, and also to administer the contract in the terms of the agreements. We have what they call an interagency agreement between the EPA and the Corps of Engineers, which dictates our role and responsibilities between EPA and the Corps. But it's basically a civilian organization with a military head. People just like you and myself.
Thank you. Now, the last person to speak with us before we take a break and come back with our questions, as you're listening to the speakers, obviously my hope is that you're writing your questions down now if you can, so that you'll be ready when we come back from break. But the real sort of technical person on this is the consultant for EPA to this point has been Camp Dresser and McKee, and to speak for them both on containment system design and the impact of the construction on the site, on groundwater, will be Arthur Quaglieri. Is it Quaglieri or Quaglieri?
Either way, it's fine.
Well, these Italians never get their names pronounced properly.
Tommy, I'll up on the stage.
With these lights on. You have to call for the lights.
Okay. This is my copy? Yeah, okay. I'm going to kill the lights now so that we can have some slides. Okay. Just to be sure that we are discussing the same Superfund site, we have this slide. The Nyanza site is located here in Ashland off Cherry Street and includes properties at the end of Magunko Road. The area is a mix of industrial buildings and undeveloped land. The elevation of the land rises from the low industrial area along the railroad tracks in Magunko Road to partway up Magunko Hill. This higher land is known as the hill, and this is what it looks like. If we look more closely, we will see what's on the hill. Sludge. Sludge was pumped from the industrial area to shallow holding areas on the hill. At times, the holding areas overflowed, permitting the mercury-laced sludge to run down the hill and reach the headwaters of either Chemical Brook to the north or Trolley Brook to the east. An attempt was made some years ago to remediate the area by excavating 2 lagoons on the hill. And this is one of them. They were originally to be used as disposal pits for on-site contaminated soils, but were abandoned when they filled seasonally with groundwater. This is an aerial, now we have an aerial photo, an aerial view of the hill area showing the lagoons and the lower industrial area. Just there's room to move up here, but these are the 2 lagoons here. This is the lower industrial area in through here. It's okay. Nyakal is right here. This is the lower industrial area. Magunko Road is right in, I believe this is it right in here. Right. And the railroad tracks. Okay. Now we're going to see some, we'll show some photos of contaminated areas that will be cleaned up in the next year by EPA, working through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This is an area in back of the Engineering Restoration Building, if you know where that is located. This is on the hill. This is near the railroad tracks, near the lower industrial area. This is an area also near the lower industrial area. If you look at this area in through here. This is an area where the sludge came down the hill, and it's caked now on the surface of the ground. It ran from here to the wetland associated with the near the railroad tracks. This is also on the hill, typical of some of the material that were buried there. This is the site as it currently exists. Here is Chemical Brook, Charlie Brook, the hill area here. These are the contaminated areas in back of that green building that we saw on the other slide. Additional contamination here, 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 here. You'll also see the dry lagoons here. Tonight we'll discuss the design of the cap and trench, which is the first phase of the site cleanup. This part of the cleanup is the result of a remedial investigation and feasibility study begun in 1983. The purpose of the study was to determine the type and location of sufficient sludge contamination at Nyanza. Following the study, a record of decision was prepared by EPA. Now, the record of decision is a legal document that outlines the remedy selected for the site. The design we'll discuss tonight is based upon the record of decision. Now, this is a drawing of the site as it will appear after the first phase of remediation. Major features that will be added include the cap. Cap is here, and the diversion trench. Magunko Hill, you understand, is much higher ground coming down this way. The cap will cover approximately 13.6 acres. About half that area represents hill area deposits of sludge and debris that will remain undisturbed, since it has been shown that these deposits are not contributing contamination to the groundwater. Now that area is approximately here. The other half of the cap will be constructed over a pit that will be excavated at the present location of the dry lagoons, which is immediately adjacent to the hill area deposits. As part of the remediation, the pit will be filled with contaminated stumps, debris, and soils excavated from hotspots in the lower industrial area. Dry soils will be deposited directly into the pit. Wet soils will be mixed with Portland cement or some other cementing agent so that moisture in the soils will be bound up and will not drain to the groundwater. The pit is sized to accept all of the contaminated stumps, debris, and soils that will be excavated. If excavations of contaminated soil exceed what is expected, there is additional capacity by placement of contaminated soils on the existing hill area deposits back in this area. The cap has been designed to prevent rainfall from wetting the contents of the pit or the hill area deposits. Water passing through the deposits might leach out some of the contamination and carry it into the groundwater. The cap also serves to keep people and animals from direct contact with the deposits. Now, the cap will be constructed in layers, each with a specific design task. Now you'll notice this area that's highlighted here. We'll see some greater detail of that in the next few slides. The following slide will illustrate the construction of the layers of the cap. The first slide shows the full cross-section of the cap at approximately the location shown in the previous slide. The gas collection layer will be at the bottom. Here it is, directly over the deposits or over clean soil that will be placed to give the cap its proper shape. Gases generated by the decomposition of wood and debris such as leaves, reeds, and sods will rise through the soil cover and pass into this